Welcome to Sam Outside. I'm Sam and I'm outside walking a bit of a different path today. Got a little bit of time. Yeah, it was bright out when I left the house, but it's that time of year. The weather rolls in pretty quickly. What I wanted to come and explore was the last of the color change of a very late fall season. Typically, the colors peak September. My part of the world does draw a lot of tourists. We have tour buses and train tours that come to my area of the world just to experience mostly the maples. And that's really what people are coming to see. The red maples and sugar maples change a variety from, greens to bright yellows and origins of vibrant reds. Most of the leaves from our deciduous trees fall off completely, late September, or pardon me, late October. Once we get into November, there might be the odd straggler, but it's the first week in November where we have the exception. You can see behind me in this wet area, the golden yellow of one of my favorite Conifers tree, and that's the Tamarack, otherwise known as the Eastern Larch. So, predominantly, as a rule, found in wet areas, right? So they'll dominate sort of wetland areas. So I know that there is wetlands around when I start to see, especially at this time of year, that striking yellow. And I was hoping to catch it with a little more sunlight because the yellow can be quite brilliant, but they stand out. Now, the Tamarack, or the Eastern Larch, is, well, let's call it the odd child. Maybe let's use the word exception to the rule. As someone who teaches forest ecology and tries to introduce young learners to what trees make up a forest and how to best identify them, we use words like coniferous and deciduous. And as a rule, especially at this time of year, any tree that's still green, it's coniferous. It's an evergreen. However, fancy word for but, there's always an exception. And the Tamarack is it. It is a deciduous conifer. Conifer meaning root word cone bearing. So that's how it fruits, right? All of its seeds are inside a little casing, otherwise known as a cone. So most of the coniferous in this part of the world happen to be our evergreens. Well, here's a young Tamarack, and it's too young to have cones, but you can see some of its elders back there along the area. In fact, you could see the needles all over this roadway. Deciduous, that's the name we normally associate with all of our broadleafed trees. Our maples, our birch, our oak, our beech, our hornbeam, our cherry, all those trees that change color and drop their leaves, they are deciduous, otherwise it's broadleaf. And in the conifers, we typically call them evergreen, except when it comes to the Tamarack. Its adaptation is to harden off, the way all broadleaf trees do, and lose its needles. And that's how it prepares for winter, putting its sap back in the ground. Now, being coniferous, yeah, it does have a little bit of a thicker pitch, but not the way we think of pitch and the way we think of pine or spruce. So it's a little bit different that way. But it does bear cones, and it does have a growth habit and a structure. And for all intents and purposes, at every other time of year, it very much looks like a coniferous tree that is evergreen, except for now, and then throughout the winter. It does this because it is very cold tolerant. This species will grow straight up through the tundra into the Arctic, right above the Arctic Circle. And it does have a number of subspecies. And of course, when we get Tamarack going that further north, obviously won't grow as tall, but they're not what's considered a large tree to begin with. They're in the small to medium sized tree. Now, I have seen them grow in every soil type. In fact, they're used as ornamental trees for some people who want the effect I'm getting right now in that vibrant yellow color later on in the fall to complement, the color they would have in their landscape in a garden or in a forested area. And again, I've seen them typically, those individuals, those specimens would be planted or harvested, from an area and put into those growing conditions. But in a forest, as a species, typically associated with wet areas. And it's because of that ability to grow, specifically a peat bog, where the soil, lack of soil, and the peat very acidic. It is, as a wood, rot resistant. That's in the construction industry. It would have been used for corduroy roads. So a corduroy road is, again, not used everywhere, but in our part of the world, it would have been used instead of, before we used gravel, they would have just cut timbers and laid them across the road. And that's what early horse and wagon traffic would have come across, was a corduroy road. Now, the roads I have today, especially the road that I happen to live on, does still have the corduroy road underneath. I know this because there are certain sections at certain times of year when the frost really gets deep, it heaves those timbers up, and every once in a while we'll be driving along and there'll just be this random piece of tamarack, part of the old corduroy road, poking through the asphalt. So they have to get removed, dug up and removed. So as a wood, its long branches would have been strong, but very pliable, would have been used in the construction of baskets and things like snowshoes and rackets by indigenous folk who happen to live in areas where there were damp soils and ground, swampy areas, bogs if you were. It is incredibly prone to insects. As a species, it gets double hit. Anything that feeds off of our coniferous trees in terms of caterpillars that would chew on needles associated with the coniferous trees, tamarack, they're just a little bit juicier. And any caterpillar that would also prefer to chew on a broadleaf, that's right, the tamarack would technically fit their appetite as well. So they are a little more susceptible to a large variety of infestations that way. And when it comes to forest fires, yeah, because their root base is so shallow, literally growing in peat, they get knocked down by strong winds, and their bark is not very resistant to fire. It's pretty thin. Now, the bark itself, thin outer, has a pretty significant pith or cambium, and that would have traditionally been used as part of dressings, all right, for things like burns and contusions. It would have had the same property that keeps it from rotting, would have had some antiseptic and anti-inflammatory properties as well. So at this time of year, when the forest is dark green and otherwise bare, the last of the striking colors come from one of my favorites, the tamarack. I made an effort to dig up a few from that bog back there and transplant them in my own yard along the ditches. I do live on a river, and there are some wet areas to either side of my property that the tamarack do quite well at, and they've been thriving. And I enjoy, when I come into my driveway, seeing the strike yellow contrast that I've made an effort to introduce to my little oasis, my landscape. So take a look around. First week of November, if you happen to live in the Northern Hemisphere, see if you can start to notice the Eastern Larch or the tamarack changing bright yellow. All right. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate the time. Sorry about the exposure and a little bit of jittery. Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.